Have you ever reached a moment where every choice felt wrong? A moment where your heart whispered one path, while your responsibilities demanded another. Imagine standing on a battlefield, not against strangers, not against invaders, but against your own family, your teachers, your childhood friends, the people who helped shape your life. Would you still fight, or would you walk away? More than 5,000 years ago, one man faced this impossible decision. His name was Arjuna. He was the greatest warrior of his generation, a fearless archer, a respected prince, a man who had never turned away from duty. Yet, on one extraordinary morning, Arjuna became so overwhelmed that his entire body began to shake. His hands lost their strength. His famous bow slipped from his fingers. He questioned everything he had ever believed. What happened on that battlefield became one of the greatest conversations in human history. A conversation that continues to inspire millions of people across the world today. This is the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita. Long before the battle began, the kingdom of Hastinapura was ruled by one royal family. Two groups of cousins were raised together, the Pandavas and the Kauravas. They learned from the same teachers. They trained together. They laughed together. But as they grew older, jealousy slowly replaced brotherhood. Greed replaced love. The Kauravas wanted absolute power, no matter the cost. Through deception, betrayal, and political manipulation, they took away the kingdom that rightfully belonged to the Pandavas. Years of injustice followed. Peace was attempted. Compromise was offered. Even a tiny piece of land was requested to avoid war. Every peaceful solution failed. Eventually, there was only one path left: war. The battlefield chosen for this final conflict was Kurukshetra, a sacred land that had witnessed generations of kings, sages, and warriors. But on this day, it would witness something far greater. Not just a war for a kingdom, but a battle between righteousness and greed, justice and ambition. Enemies feared his precision. Friends trusted his courage. He had won countless battles. He had defeated impossible opponents. He had never hesitated when duty called. Standing beside him was someone extraordinary, his closest friend, his guide, his charioteer, Lord Krishna, to the world around them. Krishna appeared to be driving a simple chariot, but in truth, the supreme teacher was preparing to reveal wisdom that would transcend time itself. No one standing on that battlefield realized that this humble chariot would become one of the most important classrooms in human history. As both armies waited in complete silence, Arjuna looked across the battlefield. He took a slow, deep breath. Then he turned toward Krishna and spoke with complete confidence. "My friend, please drive my chariot between the two armies. I want to see those who have gathered here to fight." It seemed like a simple request. Just one warrior wanting to observe the battlefield before combat. Nothing unusual, nothing dramatic. But that single request would change the course of human history forever. Krishna smiled quietly, without saying a word. He gently guided the magnificent chariot toward the open space between the two armies. The wheels rolled slowly across the sacred ground. Thousands of warriors watched in silence. The distance between the two armies disappeared. Every second felt heavier than the last. Arjuna believed he was about to look upon his enemies. Instead, he was about to come face to face with the people he loved most. And in that single moment, the greatest warrior of his generation would begin the greatest battle of his life. Not against another army, but against his own heart. Krishna gently guided the golden chariot into the narrow space between the two mighty armies. The wheels came to a silent stop. For a brief moment, the battlefield stood perfectly still. The wind carried the sound of fluttering banners. War horses snorted impatiently. Armored elephants shifted their massive weight. Thousands of warriors waited, their eyes fixed on the two figures standing in the center of the battlefield. Krishna slowly raised his hand. His voice was calm, steady, almost timeless. Arjuna, look. Arjuna lifted his eyes. At first, he searched for enemies, men who had stolen his kingdom, warriors who had chosen injustice. But what he saw was something entirely different. Standing before him was Bhishma, the grandfather who had loved him since childhood, the man who had carried him in his arms, who had blessed him before every important journey, who had dedicated his entire life to protecting the royal family. Just a short distance away stood Dronakarya, his teacher, the man who had transformed a young prince into the greatest archer in the world. Every lesson, every skill, every victory had begun with this one teacher. How could a student raise his weapon against the very hands that taught him to hold a bow? Arjuna's breathing became slower, then heavier. His eyes continued moving across the battlefield. He recognized cousins, uncles, brothers, friends, kings who had once sat beside him during celebrations, men who had laughed with him, shared meals with him, fought beside him. Some had watched him grow from a child into a warrior. Others had treated him like their own son. These were not strangers. These were memories, living memories, standing only a few hundred feet away. Each face carried a story. Each person reminded him of another chapter of his life. For the first time, Arjuna stopped seeing two armies. He saw one family, divided by greed. His heart began to race. His thoughts became louder than the battlefield itself. What are we doing? What victory could possibly be worth this? If we win, who will remain to celebrate with us? The cheers of victory suddenly felt meaningless. The throne no longer seemed valuable. Even the kingdom felt empty. He imagined the battlefield after the war, broken chariots, silent weapons, fallen warriors, fathers who would never return home, children waiting for parents who would never come back, mothers, wives, and families left only with grief. The cost of victory suddenly became greater than victory itself. Arjuna realized something terrifying. This battle was no longer about politics. It was no longer about land. It was no longer about power. It had become a battle between duty and love, between justice and compassion. His body began to tremble. The fearless warrior who had defeated countless enemies was now losing a battle against his own emotions. His fingers slowly loosened around the Gandiva bow. His confidence faded. His mind became clouded with doubt, and deep inside his heart, a single question echoed again and again. How can killing the people I love ever be called righteousness? In that moment, the greatest archer on earth no longer looked like a warrior. He looked like a son, a student, a grandson, a human being, broken by an impossible choice. The battle had not yet begun, but inside Arjuna, the war had already started. The battlefield remained silent. Thousands of warriors waited for a single command, one signal, and history would be written in blood. But inside Arjuna, everything had changed. His heartbeat grew louder. His breathing became uneven. His hands, once steady enough to strike a distant target without hesitation, now began to tremble. He tightened his grip on the Gandiva, but his strength was disappearing. His mouth became dry. His skin burned with anxiety. Every muscle in his body felt weak. His vision blurred as tears slowly filled his eyes. This was not fear of death. Arjuna had faced death countless times before. This was something far more painful, He was afraid of living with the consequences. He turned toward Krishna. His voice, usually filled with confidence, was now heavy with sorrow. Krishna, how can I fight them? Those standing before me are not strangers. They are my grandfather, my teacher, my brothers, my relatives, my friends. What kind of victory requires me to destroy the very people who shaped my life? He looked once again across the battlefield. Every familiar face reminded him of a memory, a lesson, a celebration, a childhood moment. The thought of raising his bow against them became unbearable. Then Arjuna spoke words that shocked even the greatest warriors around him. I do not desire victory. I do not desire a kingdom. I do not desire pleasure. What value is a kingdom if those I love are no longer alive to share it with me? For Arjuna, the throne had lost its meaning. Power had lost its attraction. Success felt empty, because without loved ones, even victory becomes loneliness. He continued, if we destroy our own families, what remains of society? Who will protect our traditions? Who will guide future generations? When families collapse, values disappear. When values disappear, chaos takes their place. Arjuna was no longer thinking only about himself. He feared that this war would destroy the moral foundation of an entire civilization. Children would grow up without parents. Communities would be torn apart. Generations would inherit grief instead of wisdom. He believed that even winning such a war would still be a terrible defeat. His emotions completely overwhelmed him. The Gandiva, the legendary bow that no warrior could equal, slowly slipped from his hands. It struck the floor of the chariot with a heavy sound. For the first time in his life, Arjuna could no longer stand. His knees gave way. He sat down inside the chariot, his shoulders lowered, his eyes filled with tears, his spirit crushed by sorrow. The greatest warrior of his age had completely broken down. And yet, this moment of complete despair was not the end of his story. It was the beginning of something far greater, because sometimes, before wisdom can enter the mind, the ego must fall silent. Before a person can discover truth, they must first admit, I no longer know what is right. Arjuna had reached that moment. He had exhausted every answer his own mind could offer. Now, for the very first time, he was ready to truly listen. And sitting beside him was the one teacher capable of changing not only Arjuna's life, but the lives of millions of people, for thousands of years to come. But Arjuna's story doesn't end with despair. In fact, this is where the Bhagavad Gita truly begins. In the final part of this episode, you'll discover why the greatest warrior of his time chose to put down his bow, and how that single moment gave the world one of the greatest lessons ever spoken. The battlefield of Kurukshetra remained silent. The armies stood ready. Millions of lives waited for a single command. But time itself seemed to pause. In the middle of that vast battlefield sat the greatest warrior of his age, not defeated by an enemy, not wounded by a weapon, but overwhelmed by his own heart. For many people, this moment looks like weakness. But the Bhagavad Gita teaches something extraordinary. Arjuna's collapse was not the end of his strength. It was the beginning of his wisdom. Because the greatest obstacle in life is rarely the world around us. It is the confusion within us. Every human being eventually faces a battlefield of their own. Maybe it isn't filled with soldiers. Maybe it isn't fought with bows and arrows. But the conflict feels just as real. A difficult career decision, a broken relationship, a painful loss, a business that seems impossible to save, a family conflict, a choice between what is easy and what is right. In those moments, we become Arjuna. We question ourselves. We question our purpose. We even question whether moving forward is worth the pain. The first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita does not give us answers. Instead, it gives us permission to be human. It reminds us that even the strongest people experience doubt. Even the wisest people become confused. Even the bravest warriors sometimes lose hope. And there is no shame in admitting, I don't know what to do. Because true wisdom begins the moment pride ends. Arjuna believed he had reached the end. But in reality, he had finally reached the place where learning could begin. He had stopped pretending that he already knew every answer. He became willing to listen. That single decision changed history forever. Because sitting beside him was not just a charioteer, not just a loyal friend, but the supreme teacher. Lord Krishna had remained completely silent, while Arjuna poured out his fear, his grief, his anger, and his confusion. He did not interrupt. He did not judge. He simply listened. And now, for the very first time, Krishna was about to speak. The words that followed would become one of the greatest spiritual and philosophical teachings ever recorded. A conversation that has guided kings, scientists, leaders, artists, and ordinary people for thousands of years. The Bhagavad Gita truly begins. Not with a victory, not with a battle, but with a broken heart searching for truth. And perhaps that is why its message still speaks to us today. Because every generation has its own Kurukshetra. Every person has their own battle. And every one of us, at some point in life, becomes Arjuna. In the next episode, Krishna finally breaks his silence. He reveals a truth that changes the way we understand life, death, the soul, and our purpose in this world. It is a lesson so timeless that even after thousands of years, it continues to transform millions of lives. If today's story made you reflect on your own battles, share it with someone who may need these timeless words. And if you would like to journey through all 18 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita with us, subscribe, because this is only the beginning. The greatest conversation in human history starts now.